What's going on, everyone? Welcome to this episode of the Bodybuilding for Everyone podcast. I'm your host, Caleb Disney, and today's guest is Coach Mark Tomanek of Tomanek Trained, Competition Bodies, and Everybody Coaching. Now, unfortunately, we had a little bit of technical difficulties with Mark's internet, and so I've done my best to splice all these separate clips together, and I think it came out pretty well. But the beginning is a little bit shaky, and so we cut out our introductions, hence why I'm making this intro now. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy the episode. Mark, thanks for being on.
Happy to be here, man. Happy to be involved with anything you're doing because you've done a lot of good stuff, gave a lot of good information out, and I know you connect with my people too, and so that means a lot to me.
I gotta say, Sam, I know you're really busy, and so the fact that you're here and giving me the time of day is awesome for me. Mark, about how long have you been coaching for now?
So I've been coaching, for real, like full time since 2019. Obviously, prior to that was just helping friends. One or two a year, nothing major, but I definitely got some experience. I had a lot of experience in the bodybuilding realm, just from growing up in it. So it wasn't until like 2019 though, when I really was like, well, I guess I can make this like an actual thing. Cause there was no, bodybuilding coaching being a full-time gig, back in the early 2010s. Like that wasn't a real thing. And I had a job at the time as a teacher, full-time. So I figured that's my path. Like that's what I'm doing. But once 2019 rolled around and I really started to gain some athletes that were serious and dedicated, that weren't just my friends, that's when I figured out, well, let's see where this goes.
Now there are a couple of really interesting things there, but I forgot that you were a teacher in the past, and that will tie in. I have a lot of questions about the kind of skill sets that you brought into coaching and what you found to be really useful, and also what kind of skill sets you had to develop on the fly. We'll get into that later when we get to those questions, but I totally forgot about that. Yeah. You said you started coaching your friends. We might have cut this out, but in around 2014, right? So
yes.
So that's a 5-year gap between just kind of getting your feet wet with building up some practice, getting some reps in with coaching, all the way up until you were ready to start doing it as a full-time profession. What was that kind of learning curve like? And you mentioned only a couple people a year, so I know there wasn't a lot of practice going on, but just I'm curious what that whole process kind of looked like, and how did you continue to fall in love with it as that continued?
Yeah, sure. So honestly, it was weird because I was becoming a teacher at the same time I kind of started digging into bodybuilding coaching. And this is before I even started competing. Okay. So I had no competitive experience. However, I grew up in the bodybuilding realm. I grew up reading forums and, not understanding the process fully, but learning, right? And as I was learning, I was helping people. And what's the best form of, learning? It's teaching, right? So I taught everybody that I worked with and really took time to teach them the ins and outs of what I knew at the time. But ultimately, teaching was going to be the career path for me. It was going to be the thing that, was, I guess, end of goal, so to speak, in life. Sure. And bodybuilding and coaching was not that, or at least I didn't understand what that entailed. And so as I was coaching these friends and getting them on stage and learning, as I'm going and as I'm teaching them, as I'm coaching them, I fell in love with the process of just teaching people. And that aligned with being a teacher. So all this kind of ties together as, well, I'm still a teacher today, right? My skill set of teaching has only improved as I became a bigger and better bodybuilding coach. But the whole entire process was slower because I didn't have as many bodies to work with, right? I only had a very select few individuals until I opened myself up to that 2019 year where I really went more full-time or closer to full-time. But during that whole process, that 5 years, I was working full-time teaching and coaching, not full-time, but all my friends, and I was personal training throughout that process too.
So you began coaching in 2014, started so I assume you started mostly with lifestyle folks, right? You said you hadn't even competed yourself yet, or did you?
I started right with competitors. One competitor, David, and he did a men's physique show and actually took second in his class. So that's where I started.
Okay. So that was you kind of jumped in with both feet then.
Well, what I did is I took my dad's old bodybuilding notes and I reverse engineered them. I read through them and I kind of went through the process. They laid out on paper, back in 1990 and 1992, they laid out on paper exactly what they did and how many weeks out they changed this and changed that. And I was like, okay, well, I'll let me try my best to try to reverse engineer this and understand it. And so what I did is I took it and applied it to a male, not the same weight, but close. And I started to manipulate variables and see changes in the individual. And I started to understand what they were doing just through reviewing their notes and how it impacted my athlete at the time. Okay. And so then I was able to kind of navigate that a little bit better. Even when went into peak week, I looked at their peaking strategies, which are way outdated, but applied to them to a certain degree, and they worked,
Okay. That's a really cool story. I've never heard of anybody doing it quite like that. I think it's really cool. It's fortunate that it worked out the way it did, because I imagine that feeling was very rewarding, right? And I have a feeling the next time you were asked to help somebody, you were like, well, fuck yeah, I know I can do this now.
I was a little bit more confident. I think, then athletes after that were women. Ultimately, when I started working with women, I had to figure out, how to bridge the gap between males and female physiologies and understand the differences, and how could what I'm doing apply, or how can I help? And then what were the different strategies I had to implement? So I really went through an analytical process, although I didn't know much, as much as obviously I know now, which is drastically different. I had to use the knowledge that I had, what I was learning at the time, and who I was working with, and develop strategies for those individuals. But I guess after my first success and my first athlete, I had some degree of confidence. But you don't know what you don't know until you realize you don't know, And so a lot of what I was learning, I was like, oh shit, I really don't know a lot. Most of the time that was my response, but I still had to keep my composure and confidence as a coach, and be willing to lead with still being willing to learn.
Okay. Well, that's perfect segue into my next question. So in your opinion, what are some of the most valuable sources of information that you have leveraged to get to where you are today, as far as your skills as a coach specifically?
Number one was learning by doing, right? And, obviously we want some degree of base knowledge, before we start diving into working with this
technical know-how.
Right. But there wasn't a lot. I did take anatomy and physiology. I take organic and inorganic chem, microbiology. Okay. So I had a baseline knowledge to some degree, and I was successful in those courses.
Well, that's a pretty solid base. OChem is like the hardest stuff, almost some of the hardest science-based courses you can take.
Yeah, it was brutal. It sucked. But I did it. And because I was in my collegiate career, I started out in nursing. That's where I was actually aiming towards. So I finished the courses I did until I was uninterested.
That makes sense.
So I took those textbooks, I reread through them, rehashed through them, but it was really by doing where I learned the most, and working with different bodies, different physiologies. Once I got past that point and I realized, okay, my knowledge is kind of capped. I'm still doing and I'm still learning, but not to the degree that I want. This is where podcasts really started making a breakthrough. So I picked out specific individuals that were speaking in ways that almost I didn't understand them, but I wanted to understand.
Oh, interesting.
And so I would listen more and more, and through almost repetitive listening, I started to understand them and be able to sift through things, and then pair information that I learned not only from my journey with athletes, but also the textbooks that I learned. And I started, okay, let's figure out where some of these pieces fit.
Very cool.
Once I tapped out that, it was time for a mentor, and that's where I picked up Austin Stout.
Aha, okay.
And then it brought it all together for me, and I was like, oh shit. So it was almost like all the knowledge that he had from his experience almost like bridged into mine, and I was able to take all these things that people were talking about that I was doing and learning that I've read, and I just put it all together as one big puzzle. And then that's when in 2019, I started to have a lot of success. And I continued with Austin through 2021, I think.
Okay. So he was kind of the bridge for all these specific little pieces of data, these little bits of knowledge that you were able to accumulate and kind of map out. That's super cool. So, wow. Who or what would you say was most, out of all that, what would you say is the most instrumental, as in you could not have really gotten to where you are today without, if anything?
Sure. I think, I made a lot of observations in the industry like earlier on in my career, and realizing that women were getting abused to some degree because a lot of people just
Mm-hmm.
had no know-how
Yep.
and how to work with women. And I came to these women that were literally broken. And I was like, what the hell do you do with these people? Because, you know, we could try to do all the things that we think we know, but what they require, I think, is so much deeper knowledge. And then that's where Austin came in and was like, just listening to him talk, I learned a lot, but it was more so when we went into the actual framework of his curriculum, dove into there, and I was like, okay, this is all making a lot more sense. Yeah, that was the piece that was the glue to everything that I learned and observed over my time as a coach prior.
Okay. So we talked a lot about mentors with the last guest I had on, and this just continuing to solidify that. I think this is going to be a repeat topic in the coaches I continue to interview is, you know, having a close knit group of other coaches you can bounce ideas off, your peers, but also having somebody who's been there already kind of walk you through, because everybody has different processes for how they go through this. And we are dealing with ultimately the same general topics, but every client is different. And so, yeah, not to go on my own tangent there, but very cool. Okay. So I want to segue a little bit into team building. That was the big thing that I wanted to touch on with you. First of all, I'm sorry. How do I pronounce your last name?
Tomanek.
Tomanek. Okay.
Yes,
so I've been accenting the A, but it's actually the O.
That's probably the most common thing too.
Yeah. I mean, you know,
yeah, it is what it is.
It is what it is. Now I know. Okay. So Tomanek Trained is powerhouse of coaches. How many coaches are affiliated with you now?
Oh man, out of on all my companies,
just Tomanek Trained, I suppose. You'll have to tell me about the others.
Okay, so just Tomanek Trained. There's me, Thomas, Britt, and Leah. Yes. And then we have our other companies that have other coaches and other leaderships. You know, other leaders there.
Okay, so is one of those everybody coaching?
Yeah, one of those is everybody coaching, where Thomas sidesteps into that business because wonderful in the lifestyle department. We have Britt Setterholm, who just brought on Elizabeth Claney. Those three are over there, and they're doing great things with lifestyle individuals.
So I didn't realize that everybody coaching was also you. So you're going to have to tell me more about that. I think I'm starting to understand the differences, but I'll let you tell me. You seem to put a ton of time and effort into not just your athletes, but your coaching staff, or now staffs, plural, which is, I think, really important. That's also something we talked about with the last guest, but I think coaching teams are becoming a lot more popular lately, but I don't see a consistent level of, I should say, care or effort by the head coach being put into his or her coaches. So how do you go about assessing the needs of each of your coaches as far as gaps in their current skill set and knowledge base? How do you go about helping them fill those gaps?
Sure. That's really good question. Honestly, you brought up an incredible point too about how most head coaches aren't being the leaders that they either claim to be or need to be for their people. And this is one of the biggest gaps we're seeing in the industry, especially as the industry is changing into its next phase. And the next phase is going into the one that we're currently in is authenticity. The previous one was more results based, making sure people can do it, make sure they can be their authentic self. Now we're going into something that's really going to be important moving forward. The industry is going into community building and community phase, where authentic community is going to be the most pivotal thing in the industry because it's what it lacks the most. So in my mind, when building these teams, I have to provide a community where everyone's welcome and they all have a place and people to represent, maybe that I can't connect with or I can't represent. You know, so when evaluating people initially, I'm like, okay, well, who do they represent? Who do they connect with? Who are they speaking to? Like, you know, verbally speaking to, or who's their ideal athletes and clients? And then let's look at their current client base. Let's currently look at what we're doing, like specifically with people. And maybe start talking to them and have the conversation of, okay, well, what questions do you have immediately? And then that really sparks, you know, our curriculum that we go through in our mentorship. Because there's, of course, some really nice, I think, core curriculum ideas to base your teachings around, like going through J3 University, taking it module by module. Let's have a week, every week, let's have a meeting for an hour and a half, and then just like talk. And let's you ask questions. You could watch the videos, of course, but sometimes you learn more just from hearing about how somebody does something, you know? So I want to hear how they do things, and then I'll tell them, here's maybe how I would have done it, you know? So I do my best to kind of pick their brains and talk to them, and then while leading them through specific framework. And then from there, that's when we get into the meat really of whether it's like educational documents, just discussions. It could be looking over actual like athletes they're working with, looking at their programming. How do we assess? How do we adjust? What could we be doing better? And that's when you really get into what are they missing? What do they need? You know, not so much missing, but what do they need to be the best coach, the most encompassing coach that they could be?
Okay. So there's kind of there's a set period of time on a regular basis, let's say weekly, where you're communicating with your coaches. You're having them go through some kind of predetermined information, whether that's a J3U course or your own mentorship materials, which I'd love to hear some more about in a bit. And then so you go through, you ask them questions, and you're kind of gauging their understanding of these concepts, right? And so from there, you're able to kind of see. But at the same time, I'd imagine you're also asking, just straight up asking them, where do you feel, you have gaps, right?
Yep. And honestly, I asked that during the interview process. Hey, where do you think you need to improve the most? What is it do you feel like you're missing? And the reason why I asked this and I feel it's so important is because can this person effectively evaluate their shortcomings and where they need to improve? If they can do that, they're not delusional. They're very self-aware, and self-awareness is the key, I think, the cornerstone to be able to improve and be better, not only a better human, but a better leader and a better teacher, better educator, right? Or a better coach. So I asked them that right off the bat, and I want to kind of make it so they're a little bit vulnerable. Are you willing to be honest with me and tell me, like, where do you need to improve so that I now know where I can step up and help you?
Okay. Yeah. That's really holistic, almost like beneficent kind of. And I find myself keep saying that word across these interviews, but it's true. Because, it's hard. You're doing harder work. You're taking more effort to do all this delving, but the results speaks for itself. You have multiple teams now of competent coaches that I imagine you trust enough to go off and do what they're doing. And so on that note, are you finding that you're having to do a lot of overseeing with the work that your coaches are doing, or are you confident now in their skills for the most part that they can kind of do their own thing?
I wouldn't hire them if I wasn't confident in them from the rip, right?
Okay.
Because when I hire people, I'm taking people on that are already doing, actually coaching, actually helping people, actually caring for people. So I'm already confident in them. And basically all we're doing is taking, okay, well, what's the things that you need to be exceptional? And even now, after they've all went through mentorships with me or are currently going through, this is where I'm really taking time to dive into them, their person, and connect with them. And we do get into stuff where they're a little bit vulnerable and they go, hey, I need help here. And my my phone is always open, my chat's always open, and so we'll set up a call, we'll talk about it. When it comes to other maybe more unique things like peaking, this is where I'm more hands-on.
Sure. And I think rightly so. That is something that there's so many variables and so many things can change, that it takes a really long time, I think, to really feel like you've mastered it, at least from what I've gathered, because no matter how well you handle a peak with an athlete, even the same athlete one season, the next season can be very, very different, just because a whole long period of time has changed for that person. And so their body's in a different state and is going to be responding to things in a different way. So that makes a lot of sense. What would you say is the most challenging part of managing a team of successful coaches? And how do you go about dealing with that?
Yeah. All right. So I think the most challenging thing that I've ran into, so making sure there's not too much overlap in their person and their skill sets or their focal skill sets. They all have adequate skill sets, I think, in any facet as a coach.
Sorry to interrupt. Do you mean overlap between coaches?
Yes. So overlap between coaches, not only as a person, because I want them to be distinctly different. And I want them to care for different people, and also their skill set. Like, where's their focal point? Where's the thing that they are most happy doing, or the people that they're most happy helping? Because I don't want people competing against each other to that degree. There needs to be some healthy competition, because I think healthy competition drives people. drives us to be our best self and a better coach and for better, but we can also feed off each other and learn off each other.
Sure.
So that's been the most challenging thing, is bringing on people that truly are different, or can care for different people.
Yeah.
I think that's been the most difficult thing, because there's so many coaches out there and you don't know who's real, who's not. You don't know if what they're giving out is a front, or a persona that's not them, especially on social media. It can be so easily faked. So that's been the most challenging thing for me, and making sure that everybody comes here and pulls up a seat to the table, can eat and has enough to eat.
Okay. I like that. Was that something that you went into, that when you decided to start taking on coaches, was that a goal of yours, was to, hey, listen, I want to fill my roster with people who are unique enough and different enough from each other that they can all kind of serve different types of clients or athletes? Or was that something that you kind of picked up as being necessary as things evolved?
It was definitely something that was never at the forefront of my mind in the beginning.
Okay.
I thought I would need more people like me. And that's where I messed up. I messed up in the beginning. And then I started to realize, okay, I need people different than me, because all the people that want to work with me, or people like me, they're going to want to work with me. And then I'm blocking off all the potential, athletes that they could be working with, or the coaches could be working with. So I ultimately realized this as time went on, and I went to the opposite end of the spectrum, went, okay, completely different than me. But then I was like, well, the voices don't match. The blend of ideas and persons don't match. There's no connection. And so that's where I've now fine-tuned it to find pieces and unique pieces of individuals, but also different pieces that blend together a little bit better.
Interesting. Okay. And so as you've kind of developed that, I don't want to say goal, but that desire for, these are the types of coaches you want, and these are the types of differences you want between them. Are you finding yourself, or did you find yourself kind of handpicking folks, that seeing people and thinking, you would be a great fit for my team because of how uniquely you are? Or was it more of encouraging people who you already had working under you or working with you to kind of evolve and blossom and, come into their own? Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, man, that makes perfect sense, because I've done both. When I brought people on, there was pieces of them that I really, really liked. But then as I got to know them, there were pieces of them I loved even more. And I was like, no, tap into that. That's amazing. Like, you realize you represent people that we can't, or you connect with people that I can't. And so you now open us up to be able to helping literally everybody, not just a specific type of person. And so there were things that I handpicked, but as I dug into learning these people and getting to know them becoming my friends, I was like, there's unique things about you that we should explore. Only because there's a lot of people out there that maybe don't know this or feel like they're alone, and we don't want that. That's not what we're here for.
I have in the past seen you redirect inquiries for your own personal coaching to members of your staff, citing that you think they'd be a better fit. Is this something that you did even when each of them were still in earlier in the learning stage of their careers? Or is this something you've started to do more as they've become, come into their own more?
Yeah, so I think I did it more actually when they were coming up. Now what I've noticed is they've developed their own voice and their own persona, their own person. They've developed as a coach, and now they're attracting, all their own people. However, there are some people that come through my, inquiry still, and I'm like, yeah, that's not maybe not who I want to work with at times, because there's maybe not a passion there for like a lifestyle, and we're working on something specific. I'm like, okay, not really my thing. But also, I might be too hard for that person, or I might require some things in my coaching that they're not prepared for yet.
Like a higher standard with less flexibility. Yeah.
You got it. And it could be that, or maybe my expectations are gonna be too high, and it's gonna crush their spirit, and that's not advantageous for me or them. And so it's like, okay, well, let's find someone who's more compassionate for them, or who can connect with them better.
Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. So let's dive into the different coaching businesses that you run now. So there's Tomanek Trained and Everybody Coaching, which my guess is Tomanek Trained is now focused entirely towards competitive athletes, whereas Everybody Coaching is for lifestyle. Is that correct? Or is there more?
Correct. Correct.
Okay.
That's exactly it. And I wanted to separate the brands because I didn't want people to be steered away from, how we speak on Tomanek Trained, or maybe
Yeah.
who they see on our page, because they might go, well, that's for those type of people. I don't belong there. I didn't want that. I want people to know that they belong or have a place.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense, and it's not something I've ever seen an individual do in this industry so far.
Yeah.
I think I hear very often, just through like the kind of bullshit YouTube business mentor type, who's putting the Hormozis and stuff, who put stuff out all the time. Not that he's got bad info, but like, oh, you need to pick your niche and stick with this niche, and don't worry about the people outside of it. Cater. And it sounds like maybe you started that way, I'm not sure, but it sounds like you are really taking efforts to kind of branch out and make sure that you have the right place to provide for multiple different types of people on multiple different stages of their journey.
Yeah, again, it comes back to the idea that I know that I can't represent and connect with everybody. And that what that does, it not only cuts me off from being able to help those type of people, which I'm never going to be against helping people, because that's not what I do.
Of course.
But more so, I think it really limits the people that we can help. And our service is, fantastic. Like there's not another, our coaching companies, I know for a fact, have the highest standard of care, because I know that's how much I care. And if I'm setting the standard, we'll sit there and say, hey, look, then it's exceptional. And that's the way I want it. So, I really don't know where I was going with that, so forgive me, but
no,
I get caught up in the creativity of it. And I'm like, man, that's just been so cool. I think that's been the coolest part about my journey, is starting where I did and just bodybuilding focused. And then being able to build the teams where people are represented and they connect well with people, and then giving each coach ownership and saying, hey, look, this is yours to care for. This is yours to build, delegating and giving responsibilities to people so that's their own. They care for it, they grow it, and they take pride in it.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. What I took away from that was just that, at the center of everything, your why is the desire to help people, and this understanding that there are more people who are not worthy of help, but who you have the ability to at least provide some kind of help to outside of the niche that you've chosen for yourself. And understanding that maybe you can't directly do that for all these different people, but you can create an environment where all these different people can be served and can receive the help that they need. That's super cool. The working title for this podcast is Bodybuilding for Everybody, or Everyone. And I don't fully know where I'm going with this yet, but the goal that I have is to bring these bodybuilding concepts to more people and kind of change the narrative, or help add to the narrative, that bodybuilding is this like vain, competitive thing, where that is a facet of it. But bodybuilding to me is, you're building upon what your body has, you're improving it, so being just healthier, being more athletic, being, doing things to make you smarter. Like, if your brain building stuff that's part of your body. Anything you can do for self-improvement that is going to positively impact what you're able to do out in the world physically, or just as a physical being, is, in my opinion, some kind of, you're building your body. And so that's really cool to me, just that kind of connection. What are some skills, teaching obviously, that you feel like you had prior to coaching? And in contrast to that, what are some skills that you feel you really had to develop on the fly over the course of your career?
Dang. I feel like I always obviously was a teacher first. And I guess my biggest concern in coming into this field was like, well, what does a high school teacher here have to do, or how is, he going to be able to help me? And I was like, yeah, but if I just teach, like, and I'm able to differentiate instruction to each individual and make that connection with people, even being an introvert, that's where I saw my success kind of, going towards, and being more of a teacher, being that educator. But I also feel like the skill set I had, my discipline, really made it so my business was going to be successful, whether it was today or 10 years from now, because no matter what, I was going to continue to show up every single day. And my discipline and willingness to show up for people shows up in my check-ins, because, hey, you're not waiting on a check-in. You're not waiting more than 7 hours for a check-in. You know, I'm getting those check-ins to you before 1 p.m. EST, 2 p.m. at the latest sometimes, you know, and even on my worst days where, hey, depression hits or I'm sick or whatever it may be, I'm there. Like, I'm showing up. You're hearing my voice in those check-ins. You won't ever have to question whether or not I'm going to be there, right? So that discipline factor, which came from wrestling all those years in college and high school and all that stuff, that really bled over. And I think being able to teach, being able to differentiate instruction, and connect with, you know, different people that I did work with at the time, or, you know, through my career, and that discipline factor really made my coaching business successful, at least initially. But then I ran into some roadblocks, and the roadblock mainly was, I'm a robot. I have a hard time seeing things through the lens of everyday people. And then I started to go, okay, well, shoot, how can I help these people if I can't even understand these people?
Yeah.
So I had to understand and take time into asking people about their day, or asking them questions relating to their life, because I wouldn't ask anything. I'd just be like, here's the data, here's the information, let's make the moves.
Yeah.
Instead of digging into them and understanding them, that's the one thing that's giving my coaching a step up now for me, is making those connections, that personal connection. At least I'm getting better at it. I'm not wonderful, but I'm getting better. And then I think the other thing that I've gotten really good at now is evaluating maybe when I'm off my mark, or when I do something wrong, or I make a mistake. And then understanding and evaluating, well, why did it happen? Okay, how can we circumvent this in the future? And then explaining that to whoever I'm working with, or maybe a coach that's working under me, and that is maybe a better leader in general.
Sure. Well, there's a level of not only humility, but just brutal honesty and objectiveness, being able to look at your shortcomings and assess them, and then actually act on them, which is like it's multi steps, and each step is uncomfortable, right? Just admitting that you did something wrong is uncomfortable for some people. For some people, you can have all the self-awareness in the world, but then if you're not willing to take action on it, then it doesn't mean anything too, right? And so you have to have further discipline to actually act on it. So I mean, that's commendable, and that makes a lot of sense. So personally, I am of the opinion that the best way to learn something is to teach it. And if you are somebody who just has a kind of fundamental understanding of conveying information in a way that people understand, like as a teacher, I guess you kind of have, not all teachers do this. Everybody has good teachers they remember as really good and helpful, and teachers they remember as hating. And I think the biggest thing there is the good teachers are the ones who take the time to, like you said, learn each individual student and cater to their specific learning style, because everybody absorbs information differently. And the things that I will be able to take the information away from are not always the same as somebody else. Some people do really well with note-taking. Personally, note-taking is great for me, but unless I'm talking about it actively, I'm not going to remember shit.
Right.
And so, you know, I think that's a really valuable skill. And I have a feeling that played a big role in your coming into your own as a coach, because, you know, as you were learning more information, like you told me at the beginning of the podcast, you were actively teaching it at the same time, right?
Yeah. If you think back to like 2019 though, and to about 2020, remember the whole industry was centered around education. And we pretty much burned those pathways. We burned it to the ground. So much so there's information overload now, right?
That's what everybody's doing is trying to teach on reels, you know?
Right. And it's not wrong and it's not right. There's again, it depends on your audience. It depends on what your objective and intent is. But the issue being is the industry has shifted. And I kind of explained those shifts, you know, earlier in this podcast.
Yeah.
But we were so educational based. And everyone was trying to educate, everyone was trying to learn. And so as I went through and I was speaking to people, not only on my audience on Instagram, but my athletes at the time, I learned how to do it in different ways. And now on my Instagram, you won't even see like education to some degree. It's not even there. It's just results and my community and like what I enjoy. Now I'm more me, right?
Yeah.
But with my athletes specifically, I saw this shift in time, because before it was just email, right? And I would just explain something. And then it came into voice messages. And I was like, wait a second, some people aren't getting what I'm saying after multiple tries. let's try making a video and let's try showing, okay, this is what I want your ankles to do during a hack squat. This is why we're having hip impingements and issues. Turn your toes out this way. Here's how to improve your ankle mobility. You start walking them through these things and not just explaining them over voice and memo, or walking them through their programming. Here's why I'm changing things. Like I just had a girl today, Nicole. She's like, I want to just thank you because you take time to actually explain why you're changing things and what you're seeing.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I have to. If I don't do that and you're not an educated consumer, right? Or athlete, you're not going to be as successful.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Something I've said on most of my I almost call them sales calls. My consultation calls is, listen, my goal is not to keep you as a client and athlete forever. I want you to learn as you're going, and eventually, if you feel confident enough to go out on your own and just, I want you to take something away from this beyond just the immediate physical results, because we both know firsthand how physiques are constantly in flux, right? You can spend a lot of time getting in really good shape, but just as seasons change, your physique will change. And that's normal. Humans are built for periods of excess and periods of deficiency. And so we're naturally going to be gaining some body fat, losing some body fat, in surplus deficit throughout the year. I want them to feel okay with that and know, as the seasons change, I now have the knowledge, I have the skill set and the experience to, change things back the way I want them to be as these seasons are changing. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that's really valuable. I think that actually leads people to stay with you for longer because I don't know. It's just a level of care that isn't always seen. Yeah.
Yep. It's trust, man. And honestly, I think a lot of people have a hard time trusting their coach in many cases because they're not willing to go the extra level of care that really does make or break not only the bond, but the success of the athlete.
Yeah, I see that. Okay. So interpersonal skills, it sounds like, is a really big one then. Okay. So a little bit of nitty gritty. I don't want to keep it too much longer. Talking about contest prep specifically, what are the first few things you look at when evaluating a new contest prep athlete? As in, what metrics are you looking at? What are you going to be asking them to track? And what are you most concerned with?
Sure. Are these people that have competed before or never competed before?
That's a really good question. So I actually have 3 scenarios. I have athletes who have been working with you for a while. Maybe it's just a lifestyle athlete, which may not be the case anymore since you don't seem to have many of those. Athletes who have prepped before, but with a different coach. And then athletes with zero prep experience, or zero prior experience with bodybuilding. So a lifestyle athlete who's now wanting to get into bodybuilding, I guess.
Sure. I'll start with those individuals, people that have never prepped before, have no experience, because it's funny, through the past 2 years, most of the overalls that I've won are from athletes that have never competed before.
Interesting.
Ever, first time. And so we've done a really nice job at getting them to understand our expectations and the expectations they should set for themselves. What the sport demands and requires in terms of consistency. And my rule is, hey, if you can't stick to something for 4 months, 6 months, then we got no business going into contest prep, because it's only going to go harder and it's going to demand more. You could say, well, at game time, I'll show up. Well, no, you won't.
Prove it. Yeah. I understand. Yeah.
Right. And then I think that the grit and the true passion has to be there. And that's hard to measure. That's something you can't measure. So when I'm looking at these individuals, it's really, hey, do you even have enough muscle mass to be competitive? We're taking body measurements. We're looking at visual assessments on a consistent basis. We're looking at your logbook, making sure you're progressing. Because if you're progressing, right, and in a progressive fashion in the weight room, we have to assume you're adding muscle tissue too.
Yes. Yep.
Right? Yep. It's impossible not to.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I look at body composition to make sure they're even a place where they can contest prep in a healthy manner. And then we have to look at, okay, well, how far are you willing to go? Because this is really important. If you're not willing to go all the way, and hey, in some cases we've got to use PEDs with first time athletes, because it's going to make it safer for you, or are you willing to go to a caloric place where you've never been before, and can you handle it mentally? So we're really kind of gauging mental toughness, desire, and passion in these, but also, like, I also want to know, are they going to be safe about it and not get addicted to it, because that has its own negatives, right? I think that those are the major ones. And then how coachable are they? How much are they willing to learn and then manage stress during that time? How much are they taking away from our talks each week? Because if we're just talking about stress, and that's all you are, prep's not going to get better. It's going to get worse. So really looking at making sure that coachability is there, but the lifestyle is there to support a healthy and successful contest prep.
Okay. I tend to think of you as a pretty health conscious guy. And a lot of that, I think, probably comes from the mentorship with Austin, who's also a very kind of health conscious, it's functional-esque coach. You mentioned something that I don't hear talked about a lot. And this is just on my mind because this Washington Post article came out highlighting all the dangers of bodybuilding. It's just another expose piece, right? They highlight all these things that are scary, and the idea is to get you to tune in and be afraid, and they don't present any kind of solution. And it's like, hey, look at this, fear this, see ya, which I hate. I hate those. But there's a lot they miss, and I think I mentioned to you earlier, I'm working on a video to respond to that, just to kind of put a lot of the stuff into context. But you specifically said sometimes PED use is warranted in order to be safer, and I think that's very contrary to what the layman would assume when they think of PEDs and being juiced to the gills, high blood pressure, bad cholesterol, heart attacks, kidney failure. Can you please explain kind of where your thoughts go? Because I agree with you, but I think you can probably put this in a pretty concise way.
Sure. So I've done this with a couple colleagues who are very successful. We've looked at blood work from athletes who are natural and prepped naturally entirely the whole time, and those that used PEDs. And the general consensus after evaluating the lab work was the people that used PEDs were healthier by the end, and also recovered quicker in the reverse diet, and got back like their menstrual cycle, got back hunger signaling faster, because we were able to maybe feed a little bit more. We were able to train a little bit harder, recover a little bit better. We had the modalities and the tools to do that. We didn't have to drive the deficit as much, which is dangerous, inherent. We didn't have to do as much cardio, and I didn't have to prep them for as long. So when we start using tools to mitigate some of the down regulatory effects on human physiologies that are going to happen no matter what you do in a dieting phase, even if you do it for a vacation or you do it for a contest prep, it's happening, right? But if we have tools that we can implement, and it could be simple items, in the PED realm, it doesn't have to be just anabolics. We could implement things to speed up processes and make them less severe. Ultimately, you're going to end up with a happier physiology. So with the general consensus among the coaches that are successful and actually coaching and actually winning shows is that, hey, PEDs in some cases are healthier for some individuals. There are some outliers where that maybe doesn't apply, but but I think the major asterisk here is, are you checking blood work? Are you taking care of all the necessities when it comes to health monitoring on a consistent basis with your athletes? Or are you lazy and just saying, oh, use the PEDs, it's going to be safer, and then you don't even look at blood work?
I think that's a really important thing to consider too, is that the general public kind of has a conception of PEDs in general as like a monolith, and it's an all or nothing type thing, when it's just like any other substance where the something is in the dose, right? The poison's in the dose. Yeah, there we go. So, I mean, dextroamphetamine is prescribed to children with ADHD and adults with ADHD, and is a really, really powerful tool for a lot of them. But very, very similar, a very, very similar chemical, methamphetamine, is seen as like the super dangerous, you're going to die, your teeth fall out thing. When in reality, both substances offer pretty much identical effects. And I think methamphetamine may be a little bit more dopaminergic, but it's by a small margin. But the difference is, how you're administering it, what you're administering it for, and the dosage. You could say that about like any compound, any substance in the world. Things that we take for health purposes can become, toxic and detrimental to our health when used excessively for too long a period of time, or in too great of doses. And and then again, PEDs is such a broad term, right? We think of it, it's steroids, okay, but there are so many different steroid compounds that have very unique profiles and very unique outcomes in the body. you can't just think of them all under blanket term. Trenbolone is very, very different, or Tresbolone is very different than like a Primo or Test. It just a lot of HRT doses, right?
Yeah. You could even look at in the physique enhancement development, category or umbrella. Caffeine is there. Is it not a performance-enhancing drug?
It is an ergogenic aid. Yeah.
Right. So when we're talking about PEDs, man, it's all encompassing. We're not just dealing with anabolics. And I think people are morally okay with some things, and it's just because it's been widely used.
Yes. Yep.
But if you flip the script, what's the difference? You know?
Yeah. I agree. And so I think that's something that would be important. Well, I don't see that changing anytime soon, but I think people should understand that. When we talk about using PEDs for the purpose of health, oftentimes we're talking about, yes, anabolic doses generally do scale up going into a contest prep, right? Because we're trying to maintain our ability to output and perform in the gym while maintaining muscle mass in spite of a deep deficit. And then there are some cosmetic effects there as well. But what we're really talking about is, maintaining hormonal function and presence of these sex hormones in the body, which would normally become crashed to very low amounts in a deep deficit. Talking about maintaining thyroid hormone and conversion, right? Which is also a huge, diet culture, right? That's a huge detriment there. And people are, starving themselves, but not losing weight. Well, because there are these negative cascading effects of down regulation of thyroid output and these other things that we can mitigate with, smart, conservative supplementation of thyroid hormone. So I think that's really a point. I don't want to, that's something that I love. I could probably do a whole podcast on. But, okay. So very cool. Last couple questions. In your opinion, what are the biggest knowledge and skill gaps that you see in the industry today, specifically among coaches or just in general?
I think I keep coming into contact with one, and it is physique enhancement drug applications in women.
Yeah.
Either you have the spectrum of like PEDs are also all terrible and you're going to die if you take them, so I'm never going to use them. So you end up with crashed physiologies and HPG axis that never come back online. And these women are just basement floor destroyed, right? You have the opposite end of the spectrum where they're blasting 150 milligrams of Primo for 6 months. And you're like, okay, well, there's got to be a middle ground. Like, we got to be smarter about our application. It's funny. They'll use a ton of Primo, but won't even touch T3 to save their thyroid. And it's like, where's the logic in this? And I think it's a big misunderstanding of actual physiology and pharmacology.
Yep.
They don't even look at how the drugs are applied in medicine. For example, people deathly afraid of insulin, but don't realize how it's actually used and how it's implemented. They think it's different. No, it's not different. And you have such a misunderstanding of the literature and how it's applied and the physiology behind it. Right. So I think that PED enhancement realm specifically for women is so heavily misunderstood and misinterpreted. And it's talked about unfairly.
Yeah.
In many cases. So I think that's the biggest one. I think how to peak is probably the worst applied, subject in bodybuilding in general. I think most people have no idea what they're doing when they're peaking, and they're just throwing darts at a dartboard in the dark with their eyes closed.
Yeah.
And they seem like they're intoxicated. It's really bad. I mean, both those categories are horrendous, I think.
What's funny is we got two in a row now, two calls in a row where those were the two things. The PEDs are just drug application in general, and then peaking and strategies for peaking. So there's a common theme here. I think that's really interesting, and yeah. I 100% agree, especially with the stuff regarding women, because for whatever reason, women's physiology is just so much less understood. There's still a lot that we as a culture need to learn, but also just there haven't been a lot of effort on our part as a culture that's gone into learning how the female body works, and learning these different the differences in their systems and men. And so I think traditionally men are fairly easy to, I think they're fairly well understood, and their systems are pretty straightforward as far as how their HPTA axis works, and building and the maintenance of muscle mass and all these things. We don't have really the same kind of ovulation cycle, and so we don't have to deal with these cascading or these oscillating hormones, estrogen and progesterone and everything. And so women were just kind of given the same kind of protocols that worked for men, and in some cases they worked because women are super susceptible to androgens, right, in the good ways and bad ways. But then it was really negative for their health. And then if you want to be done with your competitive career, well, now where do you go from here? All these things are messed up. So I'm happy to hear that that's such a big focus for you. I mean, it's evident in your athletes and your coaches and their athletes. I'm kind of going off on my own tangent here.
No, but I mean, you hit a great point, and that doesn't mean like us coaches that are doing our due diligence in that arena don't make mistakes. And we haven't made mistakes in the past, but it's all about learning and doing your best with the best intent possible, and doing the research that you're supposed to, taking on the education that you have to serve these people, right?
Yeah, I agree. Just kind of wrapping up these thoughts, I think that a lot of the issues that we are starting to identify with, poor application of PEDs, poor understanding of physiology, especially women, but just in general, and then obviously poor understanding of how peaking works. I think a lot of these are due to old practices of people basically throwing the kitchen sink, which is a bunch of substances and protocols that weren't fully understood and weren't very well researched, because PEDs have been being used in this sport since their conception, right? And people taking visual results as an indicator of efficacy. And yes, there were practices that worked to get people in shape and looking really good and killed them later. And now there is such a big push from folks like yourself, leaders in the industry, who are realizing we can achieve similar results without these risks, because we now understand that just because something worked to get us to one outcome in the past doesn't mean that's the only way to get there. And there is likely there are likely routes to that same place without the negative side effects. And so that's something you've been outspoken on. Your coaches have been very outspoken on, and I appreciate that. And I think that, like you said, the industry is changing. We're kind of shifting into like a more community-based approach. I think that makes a lot of sense. And hopefully this is finally, we're kind of entering the era where people start understanding safer practice. And hopefully that leads to a lack of demonization of, the practices used in bodybuilding and just bodybuilding as a whole. That's my hope for today, or for the near future anyway.
Yeah. I think people are going to have tough. There's always going to be people that are going to have a tough time with that. Like, for example, if I do my best job as a coach, day in and day out, there's still going to be people that don't like me. You know what I mean? There's still going to be people that just don't connect with me. And that's, it's okay. And we're always going to have the people against bodybuilding for whatever reasons, whatever insecurities that they carry, or whatever experience that they have had. And it's just important for us, like as coaches, leaders, and, teachers, to continue to show up for the people that do depend on us and do want to learn and do want to continue to compete and do it in a safer way.
Yeah, I agree. Best we can do is kind of try to lead by example. And, nobody, you can't please everybody, unfortunately. Okay. Well, Mark, thank you for answering all these questions and chatting with me. Thanks for taking the time. Where can people find you?
Sure, man. Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Sorry about my internet connection. So hope it all works out. I got to get a better one. Yeah. But people can find me on Instagram at the Megatron_. They can go to at Tomanek Trained and find us there, or at Everybody Coaching on Instagram, or just TomanekTrained.com. They can find all of us. We will have a couple other coaching brands up in the works here soon. They're not fully done yet, but we are constructing the framework right now to do something entirely revolutionary that the industry needs but has never done. And
no kidding.
So yeah, it's going to be big time.
I would love to hear more about that, but I'll save that for off air. Mark, thanks again for your time. I hope to have you on again, and you enjoy the rest of your day.
Hey, thank you, man. You too.